Welcome back. We are here with a very disconcerting questions. Are things in our country so bad that it might actually be time for a revolution? The answer obviously is yes. The only question is how to do it. From the wrongful wars to the corrupt economy to the special interests in the 6 industries that control every politician in this country, the political system itself, gerrymandering, 75% of all districts in the most competitive election ever weren't even up for grabs last week. You call that a competitive market? To clear our dire problems may require even more drastic solutions. And our next guest, cartoonist and author Ted Rall, targets the day-to-day absurdities of Washington through political cartoons printed in newspapers across the country. But now he's tackling something bigger, the need for real change and real action, perhaps even through violence, or at least the threat thereof. It's the subject of his new book, The Anti-American Manifesto. Ted, nice to see you. What do you mean with that title?
Well, the title's partly in jest. Obviously, I am American, I love America, and the point is to save America. I wanted to own the title because I thought that's what the other side is going to call any call to change the system entirely.
If you were to look at the way government changes, the political process being the most preferable, although sometimes viewed as totally ineffective or destructive, the bond and financial markets, which is certainly an opportunity for those to intervene over the next couple of years in this country and force meaningful reformation, passive resistance, and then the end game being violence. Why do you go to your book to the category 4, if you will, government change, which is violence?
Well, in the Anti-American Manifesto, I argue that violence is the last case scenario. It's the worst case. Nobody wants it. It's easier to go other routes. Obviously, going through the political system is best. But we've seen for the last 2 years since the economy melted down that neither the Democrats nor the Republicans nor any possible third party is poised to step in. We know that the financial markets are getting increasingly monopolized and are in bed
with an extracting machine.
And they're in bed with the duopoly.
Right.
And you know, as you showed at the opening of the hour, with the 1% of the country owning 24% of the income, and it's just getting worse, that process is just going to accelerate. In terms of passive resistance, the American left has been very peaceful since the early 70s, since the Kent State shootings. And where has it gotten us? Millions of people marched against the war in Iraq. What did it do? The tanks rolled in, just the same.
One form of passive resistance would be moving your money out of the large banks or stop paying your mortgage.
If you could get everybody to do it, it would work. But you can't even get everybody to stop littering. How are you going to get everybody to stop doing that?
And how about waiting out the bond or the currency markets, basically waiting for somebody to tell Ben Bernanke and Tim Geithner that their scam of printing money and covering up the theft is up?
Part of the problem is we don't really have time to wait. We've got a real unemployment rate of almost 20%.
Yep.
The economy is in deep trouble. People are getting thrown out of their homes, over 10 million of them. The planet's in trouble. This is unsustainable. The system is really in deep trouble.
If you were to look at where there's the most receptivity, do you get any sense that either the Republican Party sees any opportunity to gain power by fixing any of these issues, or that the Democratic Party, who everybody thought was going to fix these issues and prove themselves to be just as bought as the Republicans in many ways when it comes to the wars, when it comes to the banks, that they now have some humble pie and will actually take up the sword of justice, if you will, and reform the process, which is alarmingly corrupt?
Well, we know that jobs is the #1 priority, and Republicans don't get it any more than the Democrats do. Look at them. They're talking about shrinking government and firing government workers. That's just going to increase unemployment even further. The Democrats have been in power for 2 years. They haven't done squat. We know that the unemployment rate is going to keep going up. There's not one attempt at a jobs program from this president. So what are we going to do? I mean, it's up to the people. As John Locke said, you know, the people have an obligation to revolt when their government fails.
When you look at the behavior that we see in France or in England, where they love to revolt in a sort of semi-violent way, meaning subway strikes, all the bus drivers, all the subways, parking all the 18-wheelers on the highway for days at a time. Do you believe that that is even in the DNA of the Americans?
I think it's going to be in the DNA. I think nothing will radicalize an American citizen more than getting thrown out of their home by a bank that just paid its CEO a bigger raise this year than the year before. Nothing is going to radicalize you more than not being able to feed your kids and knowing that 1% of the country has all the money tied up in it. We're not poor in this country. This is a very spectacularly rich country, the richest country that has ever existed in human history, and yet all the wealth is tied up into these huge corporations and this tiny cabal of people.
The only thing that I'll add to that, I agree with what you just said, is that we've been to this rodeo before. The last time there was a high rate of change, the Industrial Revolution, a few people accumulated a tremendous amount of power and money because of the technological change, and it required an incredibly audacious and capable president, Teddy Roosevelt, to step in and say, no mas. I think everybody was hoping that now we've got high rate of change again, technology as opposed to industry, and yet we don't have the president saying, no mas.
We need an FDR.
Yeah, indeed. Listen, a pleasure to meet you.
Likewise.
Congrats on the book, The Anti-American Manifesto. Ted Rall.